What's shaking, my friends? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Shay, and today we are back with more end of 2024 content. Today we're going to be talking about all the DNFs that I had in 2024. I did feel like I embraced the DNF a lot more in 2024 than previous years, and so I'm really happy for me. And this list of books, it just does not mean that these are bad books, but a lot of these books were just not for me. I was not the target audience, and we're gonna go ahead and get into these books. Hills of Heather and Bone by K.E. Andrews. This is one I read for SPIP09, and this was the runner-up for the competition, I believe. So a lot of people really loved this book, and I thought it was a great book. Good writing. It just leaned more cozy than I wanted, and I have learned something about myself, that I don't really gravitate towards cozy books. So, but if you like cozy fantasy, I think that this is a good book and a good blend of fantasy and cozy. The next one is Columbus Day. I can't remember the author's name at this point in time, but I tried to read this book very close after I had read Old Man's War, I believe, in the similarities of this book and Old Man's War, and because the humorous aspects of it were very similar, and I just didn't jive with it because I thought it was less than John Scalzi's humor and works. Not that this isn't a bad book, but if you do like Old Man's War, I would recommend the series. This is a self-published series, I believe, and it is very long and very popular. Beyond Redemption by Michael R. Fletcher. This one is a grimdark story that just went more into the confused side of things than gripping me, and there was some German language in here. There was a rape scene that I didn't get down with. Not that I can't say that your book can't have a rape scene, but this particular one just threw me off a little bit, and I just found the book a little bit too confused for my liking. Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent. I just did not feel the connection between our two love interests, and I think some of it may have been due to the audiobook, so I put this one down with no plans to pick it back up. Hell Divers, and I can't remember who this is by, but it's kind of a space dystopian story, and I just don't know if that's my vibe anymore. So when I started to read the book, I just realized that this apocalyptic kind of story is not one that I gravitate towards anymore, so I put it down. Escape Velocity. I just felt this one was a little bit too dramatic, too drama filled for me, and not in a good way, like not good drama, but kind of like soap opera-y crazy drama, and I just didn't connect with any of the characters, so I put the book down. A Letter to the Luminous Deep. I got pretty far into this one, and I think what threw me off was the letter format, and I have just realized that if the whole book is written in letter format, I can't connect to the characters. I feel like you don't get what you need to satisfy the plot of the story, and you don't get what you need to satisfy the emotional character connections in the story when it's just told through letters. The Ballad of Black Tom. I didn't get very far into this. This is kind of a social commentary horror, and at the moment in time that I picked this up to read, I just was not in the mindset to read that kind of book, so I put it down, but I do plan on picking it back up one day. The Reason I Married Him by Megan Quinn. I love Megan Quinn typically, but these characters I couldn't get down with. The humorous, it just felt a little cringe to me, and so I put it down. This one really hurt really bad, but that's going to be Hair of the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I absolutely loved Gideon the Ninth this year, and I had heard, grumblings about how confusing Hair of the Ninth was, and I was, I just feel like if the confusion had a sooner stopping point, I may have continued on with the story, but no, the confusion goes the whole entire book, and I didn't understand why we were doing this whole thing in the whole entire book. Of course, at the very end, you figure out what happened, you figure out why you went through this whole confusing process, but I just feel like it was a little bit too long to go through such a process for me to stick with it. I did end up reading spoilers of what happened at the end, which is how I know what happened at the end, but again, I still put behind that it was just too long of a confusing process to go through. The Zodiac Academy. Yes, I started reading the Zodiac Academy. Why? I don't know, because I probably made it, I may have made it 80 or so pages into the book, and I just felt like this is definitely not the story for me. Bully romances, not really my thing. Shanghai Immortal. I got a pretty good ways into this book as well. I just did not feel connected with this romance that was going to jive, and I didn't feel connected with the plot line. I felt like it moved a little slow for my taste, so I ended up putting it down. Empire of Exiles. I really wanted to read this book. This was one that I was very much anticipating, and I read about 30%, and at the 30% mark, I will tell you I didn't think the world building was fleshed out. I didn't think the characters were fleshed out. I didn't think the plot was very well fleshed out. And at 30%, something's going to have to happen to maintain my attention. And I just wasn't connected with anything that was happening in the story. Potion Voyages is a self-published book that I read, and I just couldn't get down with the writing style of that particular book. Legends of Celosia is another self-published book I attempted to read, and this one was a little bit weird. Nothing was wrong with the writing style, just a little bit weird with the female, talking about females and nakedness and that nature, and so I put it down fairly early on. Silver in the Bone. I read almost this entire book by Alexandra Bracken, and I just learned that I don't really like King Arthur retellings. I really am still in Bernard Cornwell, and I like that one good enough, but I just haven't liked any other ones that I have tried. And so mythological retellings typically are not for me, and I just didn't get down with these characters either. And at some point I could have pushed through, but I'm happy that I didn't, because I haven't thought about that book since I put it down. This one hurts. I DNF'd the Ghost Brigades by John Scalzi. I have loved most of the things I've read by John Scalzi, but this is the follow-up to Old Man's War with kind of different characters, and I feel like if you're going to write a story with different characters, I felt like we repeated a lot that was in the first book, and it was almost like you didn't have to read the first one to read this one, because a lot of stuff was repeated, and then I wasn't connected with the characters. I know that we go back to some of the original characters in the later installments of the series, but I just didn't find myself caring enough about what was going on in book 2 to continue on. So the next two are both SPFBO 10 finalists, which I am reading, and my reading vlogs will be coming in the future. But the first one is The Wolf of Wither Vale, and this one had excellent writing. I just think the pace was not very well. I really loved the first 25% of the story. I actually read, this is a hefty beast, and I probably read all but 150 to 200 pages of this book, and so I could have continued on it because I read like 75%, but I just could not make myself because the pacing was off. I didn't think the relationship I really bought into, so I politely put it down. The next one is another one for SPFBO 10, which is The Heart of the Mage of Her Forest, and this goes back to the fact that I'm not a cozy fantasy fan. Not that I think that this is marketed as cozy fantasy. I think that this is a fantasy romance, but I've learned some things about myself this year, and I've learned that I'm more of an epic fantasy girly. I do also like fantasy romance if there is a good amount of fantasy with your romance, but I typically, the reason why this book kind of put me off is because I didn't feel the world building was as strong as I wanted it to be, and I felt like 100 pages in, we were still like shopping for clothes, and that kind of reading about that kind of stuff, just, it does not do it for me. But if you're a cozy fan, I think that this may work for you. I never got into the epicness of the story. I didn't get that far, but I did read over 100 pages, and we still weren't into like the fantasy portion of the story to my liking, so I put it down. But you will be hearing more about those two in a coming up vlog.
Editing Shay here. I forgot to include Chaos Vector by Megan O'Keefe. This is the second book in the series. The first book is Velocity Weapon, and I really loved Velocity Weapon. However, when I went to read Chaos Vector, I could not remember much that happened in Velocity Weapon, and there was no recap anywhere, so I was blind, and I just could not bring myself to reread Velocity Weapon in order to continue with Chaos Vector. Put recaps in your books. That's the moral of the story.
Those are all my DNFs, and so thank you for joining. What did you DNF this year? Did you actually read any of the books that I DNF'd? Did you love them? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will catch you guys in the next one.